America. Moving from the silent sands of the Tarim Basin, our path now takes us far south into the verdant highlands of western El Salvador, to a place where beauty and violence have shared the same ground for over 1,000 years. The Chalchuapa Archaeological Zone is a mosaic of ancient ceremonial centers, pyramidal platforms, and earthworks spread across an area that once formed a cultural crossroads between the Maya to the north and the Lenca to the east. In the middle of this region lies a story unlike most in Mesoamerican archaeology, a story of an intense battle whose traces linger in the soil, but whose memory has been erased from the written and oral record. Chalchuapa's ancient heart was a cluster of sites including Tazumal, Casablanca, and El Trapiche. This was not some isolated village. It was a thriving hub linked to trade and cultural exchange routes. As early as the pre-classic period, monumental architecture rose here, platforms faced with cut stone, plazas for ritual gatherings, and pyramid temples that would have dominated the skyline. The artistic styles and artifacts show influences from the great Olmec centers in the Gulf Coast, later blending with Maya iconography as the centuries passed. For much of its history, Chalchuapa seems to have been a ceremonial and political center, not a fortress. But around the 6th or 7th century AD, something changed. Beneath the layers of ritual deposits, archaeologists began to find unmistakable signs of conflict. In certain areas, the soil yielded dense concentrations of obsidian projectile points and chert blades, lethal tools of war in the Mesoamerican world. The points were not scattered as if lost during a hunt, but clustered in ways that suggested volleys of missiles or intense close combat, even more telling where the human remains. Excavations revealed skeletons showing clear evidence of violent death, fractured skulls, cut marks on bones, and positions suggesting hurried burial. In one particularly haunting case, over 30 male skeletons were found together, interred during the construction of a ceremonial mound. Whether they were defeated defenders, executed captives, or something else entirely remains uncertain. But their placement suggests their deaths were entwined with the political and ritual fabric of the city. The fortifications uncovered here stand out sharply in the context of Mesoamerican archaeology. While warfare certainly existed, it was often ritualized, with conflicts between city-states serving to capture enemies for sacrifice or settle disputes without prolonged sieges. Defensive walls, especially ones meant to withstand sustained assault, were not the norm in many lowland Maya or peripheral centers. At Chalchuapa, however, earthen and stone embankments appear to have been thrown up, some of them showing signs of rapid repair. It's the kind of work you do when you believe the enemy will be back. The most intriguing detail may lie in the obsidian itself. Chemical sourcing has shown that these artifacts were made from stone originating in multiple regions, some perhaps from highland Guatemala, others from sources in central or western El Salvador. This raises the possibility that more than two sides were involved, or that alliances brought in warriors from far afield. If the defenders were Maya-affiliated, were they facing a Lenca coalition? Or was this an internal Maya dispute that pulled in outside support? No contemporary inscriptions mention the battle. No surviving Lenca oral tradition recalls a great fight here. It is as if the event was deliberately left out of history. What could have sparked such a clash? The 6th and 7th centuries were a time of upheaval in parts of Mesoamerica. Major Maya centers like Tikal and Calakmul were locked in cycles of war, alliances, and betrayals. Trade routes shifted, and smaller centers sometimes found themselves caught between the ambitions of greater powers. Chalchuapa's location along routes linking the Maya lowlands to Pacific trade networks may have made it both wealthy and vulnerable. Salt from the coast, obsidian from the highlands, cacao, jade, all could have been flowing through here. Control of such a hub would be a tempting prize. The archaeological record provides tantalizing hints. In some areas, the fortifications seem to have been repaired in haste, stones and earth piled without the care seen in earlier construction phases. In others, there is evidence of burned structures, perhaps the result of a siege or a punitive raid. Yet, after this burst of violence, the trail goes cold. There is no layer of rebuilding that suggests a long recovery. Instead, it's as if the place simply diminished in importance. The plazas and pyramids remained, but their political weight may have shifted elsewhere. One eerie detail is the apparent expectation of renewed attack that never came. The defenders patched their walls, shored up embankments, and prepared, yet the enemy did not return. Was the first assault so decisive that the victors no longer saw a need? Or did some greater conflict draw attention away, leaving Chalchuapa to wither quietly? The mystery deepens when we consider the absence of direct commemoration. In the Maya world, rulers loved to boast of their victories, carving elaborate stele to record battles and captives. Here, nothing. No monument declares the names of leaders, no glyphs record the fallen. This could be because Chalchuapa's political culture was different from the Maya city-states farther north. Or it could be that the victors didn't want the story told at all. Archaeologists continued to study the zone, piecing together timelines from ceramics, radiocarbon dates, and stratigraphy. Yet the exact sequence of events remains elusive. Without written records, every interpretation must be drawn from the positioning of bones, the scattering of weapons, and the layers of earth. Each find adds a piece to the puzzle, but the full picture may never emerge. Even so, the Battle of Los Naranjos, if that's what we choose to call it, stands as one of the more captivating glimpses into a side of Mesoamerican life we rarely see so starkly. It's not the grand, ritualized warfare of painted codices or stone-carved steel. It's something messier, more desperate, a real fight for survival, waged in the shadow of sacred pyramids, remembered only in the silent testimony of fortifications and unmarked graves. And perhaps that's the most haunting part. We can stand today on the grassy mounds, look out over the valley and imagine the chaos, the shouts of warriors, the hiss of arrows, the crash of obsidian-tipped spears against wooden shields. We can picture the survivors patching their walls under a wary sky. But we cannot name them. We cannot say who they fought or why. All we have are the bones, the stones, and the unanswerable questions they leave behind. From this silent battlefield in El Salvador, we now travel far north and thousands of years back in time to a very different kind of mystery. One buried in an oak coffin beneath the peat of Denmark, where the Bronze Age Egtved girl waits to tell her story. From the chaos of battle in El Salvador, we move to something altogether different, a scene of stillness, precision, and quiet reverence preserved in the damp earth of northern Europe. Here, in the small Danish village of Egtved, archaeologists opened an oak coffin in 1921 and came face to face with one of the most intriguing Bronze Age burials ever found. The coffin was found in a peat bog, the kind of environment famous for preserving organic material for thousands of years. Oxygen-poor, acidic, and wet, the bog creates a natural time capsule. When the oak lid was lifted, the body itself had long since decomposed, leaving only bones and fragments. But remarkably, her clothing, hair, and several personal items lay almost exactly as they had been placed some 3,400 years earlier. The young woman became known simply as the Egtved girl. She was about 16 to 18 years old at the time of her death, during the Nordic Bronze Age around 1370 BC. What struck archaeologists first was the craftsmanship of her clothing, a short-sleeved blouse of finely woven wool and a distinctive corded skirt made of multiple strands that hung just above the knee. Around her waist was a bronze belt plate, intricately decorated with spirals and geometric designs, a masterwork of metalwork for the time. She wore bronze arm rings and a small comb made of bone. At her feet, wrapped in animal skin, lay the cremated remains of a child. The details were unusual. Bronze Age burials in Scandinavia often contained elaborate goods, weapons, tools, ornaments. But here, the focus seemed to be on the quality of the clothing and the belt plate. The bronze itself was not local. The metal would have been imported from hundreds of kilometers away, a sign of far-reaching trade connections. The wool in her garments was of exceptional quality, dyed in subtle shades and woven with great skill, suggesting she came from a family of considerable status. For decades, the Egtved girl's life remained a blank slate. Then, in the 2010s, scientists carried out isotope analysis on her hair and teeth. The results completely reshaped her story. Her teeth showed she had been born far from Egypt, likely in what is now southern Germany. Her hair, which grows about a centimeter per month, preserved a chemical record of her final 23 months of life. It revealed that she had traveled repeatedly between Denmark and her homeland in southern Germany during that period. The analysis suggested at least 2 or 3 long journeys, each spanning hundreds of kilometers, and not leisurely wanderings. These were purposeful trips, moving between 2 specific regions over and over again. Her final return to Denmark occurred only weeks before her death. This level of mobility in the Bronze Age is extraordinary. It implies organized networks capable of supporting long-distance travel and the exchange of goods, ideas, or people. But why was a teenage girl making these trips? The theories are many. She may have been part of an elite marriage alliance, strengthening political or trade ties between powerful families or tribes in different regions. She could have been a religious figure, traveling as part of ceremonial obligations or seasonal rites, moving between sacred sites. Some suggest she may have been connected to trade caravans, acting as a representative or escort in an exchange system that carried metals, amber, and textiles across Europe. The cremated child buried with her adds another layer of mystery. Was it her child, a younger sibling, or someone unrelated but ritually significant? The cremation itself is noteworthy. In Bronze Age Denmark, inhumation was more common, especially in such carefully prepared burials. The child's inclusion hints at a personal or symbolic connection that was important enough to mark in death. There is also the question of her death itself. No signs of trauma were found on the surviving remains. There are no obvious markers of disease. It's possible she died from an illness that left no trace in bone, or perhaps from complications of travel. The timing of her final journey, ending just before her death, raises the possibility that her travels and her fate were linked. Archaeologists have noted that the Egtvedid girl's burial shows both local and foreign elements. The oak coffin and bog setting are consistent with high-status Nordic Bronze Age burials, but her clothing style and the origin of her belt's metal point south, toward the tumulus culture of Central Europe. This blend suggests she may have embodied a connection between these 2 regions, a living link between distant peoples. The precision of her burial is striking. Her skirt was arranged neatly, her belt plate centered, her hair in place. This was not a hurried interment. Whoever buried her took care to present her as if in life, youthful, adorned, and significant. And yet, the grave goods are sparse. There are no weapons, no additional ornaments beyond the essentials. Perhaps the absence was intentional, marking her identity not through quantity of goods, but through the distinctiveness of her attire and the symbolic power of the bronze plate. Today, the Egtvedid girl is displayed in the National Museum of Denmark, her clothing, belt, and hair preserved in climate-controlled cases. Visitors are often surprised at how modern her skirt appears, with its layered cords swaying freely. Her belt plate remains one of the most intricate Bronze Age artifacts found in Northern Europe. But beyond the craftsmanship, the most compelling thing about her is the unanswered questions her grave poses. We know where she came from. We know she traveled immense distances at a time when most people rarely left their home region. We know she returned to Denmark shortly before her death, and that someone cared enough to give her a burial of dignity and precision. What we don't know, and may never know, is why she lived this way. Was she a figure of political importance, moving as part of a network that kept peace and trade flowing between regions? Was she a spiritual traveler, part of a cycle of ritual journeys that connected far-flung communities? Or was her mobility tied to something more personal, family, love, obligation, now lost to time? The evidence leaves no clear answer, only the outline of an extraordinary life cut short. A young woman whose footsteps traced a route across Bronze Age Europe, now lying still in the quiet earth of a Danish bog. Leaving the quiet peatlands of Denmark behind, we cross into dry country, basalt plateaus, dusted steppe, and long horizons where the wind has been erasing footprints for thousands of years. From the ground, you might walk past them without a second glance, low, broken lines of stone, knee-high at best, but climb a ridge, or better yet, look from the air, and they resolve into vast geometric funnels. Two or more walls sweep inward for hundreds of meters, even kilometers, narrowing to a head made of pens or a cliff edge. Early pilots thought they looked like children's toys laid across the desert and dubbed them desert kites. The name stuck. These kites spread across a broad belt of the Middle East, eastern Jordan's black basalt Hara, the steppe west of Palmyra in Syria, the lava fields and oases of northern Arabia, notably around Khaybar and Al-Ula, out into the Sinai and Negev, with cousins or close analogues reported further afield in parts of Armenia and the Caucasus. Aerial surveys and satellite imagery have mapped thousands of them. Some regions are dense with overlapping examples, old lines cut by newer ones, heads rebuilt, driving walls extended, evidence not of a single project, but of a tradition revisited and modified over centuries. Pinning down their ages is tricky. Many kites are pure stonework with no preserved wood or bone in the walls themselves. Where dating is possible, it tends to come from associated finds. Hearths and camps abutting the heads, scatters of chipped stone along the driving lines, or animal bone deposits inside the pens. In a handful of sites, optically stimulated luminescence OSL on sediments and radiocarbon on nearby organic material push some examples deep into prehistory, into the late Neolithic, while others appear to have remained in use or been refurbished into the Bronze Age and even later. In short, it wasn't a single cultural moment. The kite concept seems to have had a long life. The dominant explanation is straightforward and compelling: mass hunting. Imagine a wide, shallow V opening onto steppe or wadi, what researchers call driving lines. On a chosen day, dozens or hundreds of people spread out across the plain, forming a human net. Shouting, waving, and advancing, they drive a moving front of gazelle onager or oryx toward the widening mouth. The panicked herd enters the funnel, the walls squeeze their options as people close in behind at the tip. Animals are trapped in a lattice of small cells, stone pens inside the head, or are pushed over a natural drop where a cliff or steep ravine finishes the job, in some heads narrow. America. Moving from the silent sands of the Tarim Basin, our path now takes us far south into the verdant highlands of western El Salvador, to a place where beauty and violence have shared the same ground for over 1,000 years. The Chalchuapa archaeological zone is a mosaic of ancient ceremonial centers, pyramidal platforms, and earthworks spread across an area that once formed a cultural crossroads between the Maya to the north and the Lenca to the east.